I never expected a simple home improvement project to turn into a neighborhood war. But when Brenda from the HOA board showed up at my door with that pinched expression and a clipboard, I knew my peaceful life in Scottsdale, Arizona, was about to get complicated. It was a Tuesday morning in late January when she came knocking, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against my doorframe like a woodpecker on steroids. I opened the door with my coffee still in hand, steam rising from the mug in the cool desert morning air. "Mr. Kelly," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss your recent installation." I blinked at her. "I'm sorry, what installation? Don't play dumb with me. The heating exhaust system on the side of your house. It's creating visible vapor that several neighbors have complained about. It's unsightly and potentially hazardous." I glanced over at the side of my property, where my new geothermal heat pump system sat, quietly doing its job of keeping my 2,400 square foot home comfortable without destroying my bank account every month. The thing was an engineering marvel, really, and I'd been thrilled when the installation finished just 3 weeks ago. "That's my new heating and cooling system," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "It's geothermal, state-of-the-art. Uses the Earth's natural temperature to heat and cool the house. That vapor you're seeing is just condensation from the heat exchange process. It's completely harmless, just water vapor." Brenda's lips pursed tighter, if that was even possible. She was probably in her late 40s, with that aggressive blonde bob haircut that seemed to be standard issue for HOA board members across America. Her pantsuit was crisp, despite the early hour, and her eyes had that gleam that said she lived for moments like this. Nevertheless, the HOA bylaws clearly state that any installation that creates a nuisance or detracts from the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood requires board approval. "Did you get board approval, Mr. Kelly?" I felt my jaw tighten. "I submitted the plans 2 months ago. Got them approved in writing. I have the email right here on my phone if you want to see it." Her expression flickered with something, annoyance maybe, but she recovered quickly. That approval was for the system installation, not for the unsightly discharge it produces. "I'll need you to either relocate it or find a way to eliminate the visible vapor. You have 30 days. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, leaving me standing there with my coffee getting cold and my blood pressure rising. My name is Jason Kelly, and I'd moved to this planned community in North Scottsdale about 5 years ago. The Desert Ridge Vista development was nice enough, with its Spanish-style homes, manicured lawns that somehow stayed green despite the desert climate, and a community center with a pool that I rarely used. The HOA had always been a minor annoyance, the kind that sent passive-aggressive letters about trash, cans being visible from the street, or Christmas lights staying up too long, but nothing like this. I went back inside and pulled up the email chain from when I'd submitted my installation plans. There it was, clear as day, approved by the Architectural Review Committee. The plans had included detailed specifications of the entire system, including the heat exchanger, and yes, the external components that would produce some condensation during operation. I forwarded the email chain to myself as backup and decided to swing by the HOA office that afternoon. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding. Maybe Brenda hadn't seen the original approval. Maybe, I thought optimistically, this could be resolved like reasonable adults. I should have known better. The HOA office was located in the community center, a low-slung building painted in desert tones with a clay tile roof. Inside, the receptionist, a friendly woman named Maria who'd always been pleasant to me, looked up from her computer with a sympathetic smile. "Let me guess," she said. Brenda paid you a visit. How'd you know? She's been on a tear lately. New year, new crusade, I guess. What's she after you for? My heating system. Says the vapor it produces is a nuisance. Maria winced. Ouch. Want to see the board? Brenda's here, along with Patricia and Doug. Might as well get this over with. She led me back to a conference room where the 3 board members sat around a table that was too large for the space. Brenda looked up with that same pinched expression. Patricia, an older woman with iron gray hair, at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Doug, a paunchy guy in his 60s who I'd seen around the neighborhood, just looked bored. Mr. Kelly, Brenda said, I didn't expect to see you so soon. Just wanted to clear up the confusion about my system. I have the approval right here. I pulled out my phone and showed them the email thread. Everything was approved by your architectural committee. The system operates exactly as specified in the plans. Patricia leaned forward to look at the emails. He's right, Brenda. We did approve this. Brenda waved a hand dismissively. That approval didn't account for the visual nuisance it creates. We've had complaints. From who? I asked. That's confidential. How can I address complaints if I don't know who's making them or what specifically they're complaining about? The vapor, Brenda said, her voice sharp. It looks like smoke. People think there's a fire. It's confusing and disturbing. I took a deep breath. It's water vapor. It dissipates in seconds. The system only produces it during certain weather conditions when there's a significant temperature differential, and it was all in the approved plans. Doug finally spoke up, his voice gravelly. Look, kid, I don't see what the big deal is. System was approved. End of story. Brenda shot him a look that could have frozen the desert. The board has the authority to revoke approvals if unforeseen circumstances arise that impact community standards. That's not what the bylaws say, I countered. I'd done my homework after her visit this morning, spending an hour reading through the entire HOA rulebook online. Section 12 clearly states that once architectural approval is granted and construction is completed to specification, the approval stands unless the installation violates local building codes or creates an actual hazard, not just an aesthetic concern. The room went quiet. Patricia was looking at Brenda with raised eyebrows. Doug had actually sat up straighter, apparently interested now. Brenda's face had turned a shade of red that clashed with her blonde hair. We'll need to consult with our attorney about this. In the meantime, I'm asking you as a courtesy to minimize the visual impact of your system. How exactly am I supposed to do that? Turn off my heat. It's 50 degrees at night. That's your problem to solve, Mr. Kelly. I left the community center feeling like I'd just gone 10 rounds in a boxing match. This was insane. I'd spent $15,000 on an eco-friendly heating system that was going to save me hundreds every month in electricity costs, gotten proper approval, had it professionally installed, and now some busybody with too much time on her hands was trying to make my life miserable. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I couldn't have predicted. First came the formal letter, delivered by certified mail, stating that I was in violation of HOA standards and had 21 days to remedy the situation or face fines of $100 per day. I immediately contacted a lawyer, a guy named Robert Chen who specialized in HOA disputes. They don't have a leg to stand on, Robert said after reviewing my documents. You've got written approval, the system meets all codes and their own bylaws protect you. But here's the thing about HOA disputes. Even when you're right, they can make your life hell. These boards have dues money to burn on legal fees. Do you? So what do? We can fight it. I'll send them a letter explaining that their position is legally unsound. Sometimes that's enough to make them back down. Sometimes it just makes them dig in harder. Robert sent the letter. Brenda dug in harder. The next move was subtle but effective. Suddenly, I was getting violation notices for everything. My trash can was visible from the street for 45 minutes past the pickup time. My lawn had a single patch of discoloration that was apparently unacceptable. My mailbox needed repainting. Each notice came with the threat of fines and hearings. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, comparisons with neighbors whose violations were apparently invisible to the HOA. My neighbor to the left, Tom, had a trash can that stayed out for days. The house across the street had a lawn that was more brown than green. But somehow, I was the only one getting notices. Then things got weird. I came home from work one evening in early February to find a utility company truck parked near my property. Two men in hard hats were examining my heat pump system, making notes on clipboards. "Can I help you?" I asked, walking over. One of them looked up. "You the homeowner?" "Yeah, what's going on?" "Got a report about this unit possibly interfering with utility lines. We're just checking it out." "Report from who?" he shrugged. "Comes through the central office. Could be anyone. Neighbor, city inspector, whoever." They spent 20 minutes examining everything, then declared it was all fine and left. I knew without proof that Brenda was behind it, trying to find any angle to cause me problems. But the real revelation came 2 weeks later, and it changed everything. I was at the community center, using the gym for the first time in months, trying to work off stress through cardio. Maria from the office was on the treadmill next to mine. "How's the HOA war going?" she asked between breaths. "About as well as can be expected." "Brenda seems determined to make me miserable." Maria was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you something off the record?" "Sure." "Brenda drinks probably 6 bottles of water a day from the community center. We've got this whole system here, maybe you know about it." "The community center has geothermal heating and cooling too. Been here since the place was built 8 years ago." I nearly fell off the treadmill. "What?" "Yeah, it's a bigger system than yours, I'd guess. Heats the whole community center, the pool, and provides hot water for the showers and drinking fountains. The hot water gets cooled back down for drinking, but the heat source is the same system." My mind was racing. "So you're telling me that the same technology she's trying to ban from my property is what's providing amenities to the entire community?" "Basically. And here's the kicker. That system puts out way more vapor than yours does. But it's on the back side of the building where nobody really sees it except maintenance." I finished my workout in a daze, ideas forming. This was the leverage I needed, but I had to be smart about how I used it. The next morning I called Robert Chen and explained what I'd learned. "Can we use this?" "Absolutely. It establishes that the HOA doesn't have a blanket policy against geothermal systems and the vapor they produce. They're applying rules selectively, which is a violation of their duty to enforce rules uniformly. This is good, Jason. Really good." That weekend, I did my homework. I walked around the community center with my phone, taking photos and videos of the geothermal system. It was bigger than mine, a commercial unit with multiple exhaust points. The vapor plumes were significantly larger than what my system produced, visible from several angles around the building. I also filed a request under Arizona's public records laws to get information about the community center systems, including installation dates, permits, and maintenance records. As a homeowner in the HOA, I had the right to review HOA financial records and major installation documents. Brenda tried to block me. She claimed the information was proprietary and that my request was harassment. Roberts sent another letter explaining that Arizona law was crystal clear about HOA transparency requirements. 3 days later, I had a thick folder of documents. The community center's geothermal system had been installed in 2017 at a cost of $85,000, paid for by HOA dues and a special assessment. The system provided heating, cooling, and hot water to the entire facility. The architectural plans clearly showed the vapor exhaust points. Most importantly, there had been no special screening or vapor mitigation measures required, despite the system being far larger than mine. Armed with this information, I requested a formal hearing before the HOA board to dispute the violation notices and threatened fines. The hearing was scheduled for the first Tuesday in March, held in the same community center that was being warmed by the very technology Brenda wanted to ban from my property. The meeting room was packed. Word had apparently spread through the neighborhood about the dispute, and people were curious. I recognized several neighbors, some supportive, others who probably agreed with Brenda that property values were somehow at risk from a tiny plume of water vapor. The board sat at the front table. Brenda in the middle, Patricia to her right, Doug to her left. 2 other board members I'd barely interacted with sat at the ends. Brenda called the meeting to order with an officious rap of her gavel. We're here to address the continuing violation at 4521 Saguaro Vista Drive, the property of Jason Kelly. Mr. Kelly, you have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood, my folder of documents in hand and Robert Chen beside me. Thank you. I'll try to be brief. 3 months ago, I submitted plans for a geothermal heating and cooling system for my home. Those plans were reviewed and approved by the architectural committee. The system was installed according to code and exactly as specified in the approved plans. The system produces a small amount of water vapor during certain operating conditions, which is normal and unavoidable for this type of technology. I pulled out the approval emails and passed copies to each board member. Here's the written approval. As you can see, the plans included full specifications that clearly indicated the system would produce vapor discharge. Brenda barely glanced at the papers. As I've explained, the approval didn't account for the nuisance factor of the visible discharge. Actually, it did. But let's talk about nuisances and standards. I pulled out my photos of the community center's geothermal system. This building, owned and operated by the HOA, uses the exact same technology. In fact, it uses a much larger system that produces significantly more vapor discharge. Here are photos taken last week. I passed the photos around. Several people in the audience leaned forward with interest. Patricia was studying the images with a frown. Doug had that bored expression again, but his eyes were tracking the conversation. The community center's system is different, Brenda said quickly. It's a commercial installation. The technology is identical. The principles are identical. The only difference is scale. And according to these documents, I pulled out the installation records, the HOA installed that system with full knowledge that it would produce vapor discharge. In fact, the installation plans specifically mention it. Robert stood. For the record, I'm Robert Chen, representing Mr. Kelly in this matter. What we have here is selective enforcement. The HOA cannot approve and operate a geothermal system for its own facilities while simultaneously banning an identical system on an owner's property. That's arbitrary and capricious enforcement, which violates Arizona HOA law. Brenda's face was getting red again. The community center's system serves the entire community. That's irrelevant to the question of whether the technology itself is acceptable. You've established by your own actions that geothermal systems and their vapor discharge are acceptable in this community. You cannot then turn around and claim Mr. Kelly's system is a nuisance simply because you don't like where it's located. Patricia spoke up. Brenda, he has a point. If we've got the same system here, we can't very well tell him he can't have one. That's not the same thing, Brenda insisted, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. I pressed on. There's another issue here. This building's geothermal system provides hot water throughout the facility, including to the drinking fountains. The heat pump warms water that, after being cooled, becomes drinking water. So every time you fill up your water bottle here, Brenda, you're drinking water that was heated by the same technology you're trying to ban from my property. The room went completely silent. I could see people in the audience processing this information. Brenda's mouth opened and closed without sound. That's not. She stammered. It's in the system documentation. The geothermal heat pump heats water to 140 degrees. That hot water runs through the building's plumbing system, including to a heat exchanger that pre-warms the incoming cold water before it goes to cooling for the drinking fountains. It's efficient and environmentally friendly, just like my system. Robert stepped in again. The point is this. Mr. Kelly obtained proper approval, installed a code compliance system, and is being penalized for using technology that the HOA itself relies on. The violation notices need to be rescinded, and the threatened fines need to be withdrawn. If this board insists on proceeding with enforcement action, we'll have no choice but to file suit. Doug leaned back in his chair. Seems pretty clear to me. We approved it, we used the same thing ourselves, case closed. Patricia nodded. I agree. I think we overreached on this one. Brenda looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. We need to discuss this in executive session. There's nothing to discuss, Patricia said firmly. We're applying a double standard and that's not right. I move that we rescind all violation notices related to Mr. Kelly's heating system and acknowledge that the system was properly approved and installed. I second, Doug said immediately. Brenda stared at them both with undisguised fury. We need to maintain community standards. We need to follow our own rules, Patricia shot back. All in favor of rescinding the violations. 4 hands went up. Only Brenda's stayed down. The motion passed. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I could see from Brenda's expression that this wasn't over. Not for her. The meeting adjourned, and several neighbors came up to congratulate me or ask questions about the geothermal system. A few admitted they'd been considering similar installations, but had held back because of the HOA's reputation for being difficult. Now, with this precedent established, they were thinking about moving forward. Tom, my neighbor with the perpetually visible trash cans, clapped me on the shoulder. Well done, man. Brenda needed to be taken down a peg. I wasn't trying to make an enemy, I just wanted to keep my heating system. Yeah, well, you made one anyway. She's going to be watching your property like a hawk now. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I got violation notices for increasingly petty things. My garden hose was visible in my side yard. There was a small stain on my driveway. My house numbers needed to be cleaned. Each notice was technically valid, barely, but the pattern was obvious. Robert advised me to comply with everything, document the selective enforcement, and build a case if it continued. She's digging her own grave, he said. Just don't give her any legitimate ammunition. But then things took a turn that neither of us expected. It was a Thursday afternoon in late March when Maria called me. Jason, you need to come to the community center now. What's wrong? Just come. Trust me. I drove over, my mind running through possibilities. When I arrived, I found Maria in the office with 2 other staff members, all looking worried. What's going on? Maria handed me a spreadsheet. I've been going through the HOA's financial records. It's my job to reconcile accounts every quarter, and I found something. The spreadsheet showed a series of transactions from the HOA's maintenance fund. Regular payments to various vendors, all normal, except for one recurring charge, monthly payments of $2,000 to something called Desert Ridge Property Consulting. What's this company? That's what I wanted to know, so I did some digging. Desert Ridge Property Consulting is owned by Brenda's husband, Mark Thompson. My eyes widened. She's paying her husband's company from HOA funds. It gets worse. I went back through 2 years of records. That's $48,000 paid to this company. And I can't find any invoices, work orders, or documentation of what services were provided. This was bad. Really bad. Embezzlement level bad. Have you told anyone else? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first because, well, you seem to be the only person willing to stand up to Brenda. We need to tell the other board members, Patricia and Doug at least. We arranged a meeting for that evening, just the 5 of us. Me, Maria, Robert Chen, Patricia, and Doug. When we showed them the financial records and explained what Maria had found, Patricia's face went pale. Oh my God. This is fraud. Doug was studying the spreadsheet with a grim expression. We need to bring this to the full board. Brenda will just deny everything and try to cover it up, I said. We need to document everything first and maybe even report it to authorities. Robert nodded. This is beyond HOA dispute territory. If Maria's right and there's no legitimate business purpose for these payments, we're talking about embezzlement of HOA funds. That's a criminal matter. I can report this to the Arizona Attorney General's office, which handles HOA fraud cases. Patricia looked stricken. I trusted her. I've been on this board for 6 years and I never thought to question the finances. She always said she had it under control. That's how these things work, Robert said gently. One person controls the information flow, and everyone else assumes it's legitimate. We decided on a plan. Robert would file a report with the Attorney General's office and provide them with all the documentation Maria had gathered. Patricia and Doug would call an emergency board meeting and vote to suspend Brenda from her position pending an investigation. Maria would secure all financial records to prevent any tampering. The emergency board meeting happened 2 days later. Brenda showed up expecting a routine session and instead walked into an ambush. Patricia, speaking with a firmness I'd never heard from her before, laid out the evidence and made a motion to suspend Brenda immediately and hire a forensic accountant to review all HOA finances. Brenda's reaction was almost cartoonish. She went from denial to anger to tears to threats in the span of 5 minutes. This is a witch hunt. Jason Kelly has been harassing me since day 1. This has nothing to do with Jason, Doug said flatly. This is about $48,000 paid to your husband's company with no documentation. Explain that. It's consulting work, property management advice. Then show us the invoices, show us the work product, show us anything that justifies those payments. Brenda couldn't. The motion passed 4-1, with only Brenda voting against her own suspension. Security escorted her from the building, still yelling about conspiracies and persecution. The forensic accountant's report, delivered 3 weeks later, was even worse than we'd feared. The payments to Desert Ridge Property Consulting were just the beginning. Brenda had been skimming HOA funds for over 3 years through a variety of schemes. Inflated vendor invoices where she got kickbacks. Duplicate payments that got deposited into accounts she controlled. Even outright theft using HOA debit cards for personal expenses. All told, she'd stolen nearly $120,000. The Attorney General's office opened a formal criminal investigation. In early May, Brenda Thompson was arrested at her home and charged with 8 counts of fraud and embezzlement. Her husband Mark was also charged as an accomplice in the consulting company scheme. The news rippled through the Desert Ridge Vista community like an earthquake. People were shocked, angry, and in some cases sympathetic, though I couldn't understand why anyone would feel sorry for someone who'd stolen from all of us. The HOA had insurance that would cover most of the stolen funds, but the deductible and increased premiums meant everyone's dues would be going up slightly. Still, it could have been worse. Patricia took over as interim board president and proved to be everything Brenda wasn't: transparent, reasonable, and actually interested in serving the community rather than controlling it. One of her first acts was to issue a formal apology to me for the harassment over my heating system. "You were right all along," she said when we met in her office. "And if you just rolled over and accepted the violation notices, we might never have looked closely enough at Brenda's activities to catch the fraud. So in a weird way, your stubbornness saved us all a lot more money." "I just wanted to heat my house," I said. "Well, you did that and took down a criminal in the process. Not bad." The criminal case moved through the system with surprising speed. Brenda's lawyer tried to work out a plea deal, but the Attorney General's office was using the case as an example, wanting to send a message about HOA fraud. In August, 7 months after my heating system had first drawn Brenda's wrath, she stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to 5 counts of embezzlement. The judge wasn't sympathetic. Brenda got 3 years in state prison and was ordered to pay full restitution of $120,000 plus penalties. Her husband Mark got 18 months and probation. Their house in Desert Ridge Vista went up for sale to help pay the restitution. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. When it was over and Brenda was led away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Vindication, yes. But also a strange sadness that things had gotten this far, that someone had been so consumed by pettiness and greed that they'd destroyed their own life. The Desert Ridge Vista HOA implemented new financial controls and oversight procedures. Multiple board members now had to approve any significant expenditure. Monthly financial reports were posted online for all homeowners to review. Maria got a raise for catching the fraud and was named the community's financial officer. As for my heating system, it continued to operate perfectly, saving me about $300 a month on utilities, just like the installer had promised. The tiny plume of water vapor it produced during cold mornings became something of a conversation piece in the neighborhood. Several other homeowners installed similar systems, citing the precedent my case had established. Tom next door finally got around to properly storing his trash cans, not because the HOA made him, but because, as he put it, "If you could take on Brenda over a heating system, I can at least keep my trash cans out of sight." The story made the local news when Brenda was sentenced. A reporter interviewed me about how a complaint over a heating system had led to uncovering one of the larger HOA fraud cases in Scottsdale history. I tried to downplay my role, but the reporter wasn't having it. "You stood up to a bully," she said. "That takes courage." A lot of people would have just torn out the heating system and moved on. Maybe. But I'd spent good money on that system, gotten proper approval, and done everything right. I wasn't about to be pushed around by someone who couldn't stand that I'd found a better way to heat my home. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brenda had complained so bitterly about vapor from my system, while drinking water every day that had been warmed by an identical system. There was something poetic about it, the way her own hypocrisy had come full circle. Life in Desert Ridge Vista settled into a new normal. Patricia ran for permanent board president in the annual election that fall and won easily. She appointed several new committee members, including me to the Architectural Review Committee, which I accepted with some reluctance. "You know more about this stuff than anyone else now," Patricia said with a laugh. "Plus, you'll make sure we don't pull any more nonsense like what Brenda tried." My first act on the committee was to draft new guidelines for sustainable home improvements, including explicit approval for geothermal systems, solar panels, and other eco-friendly technologies, as long as they met code. The full board approved the guidelines unanimously. In December, nearly a year after Brenda had first knocked on my door to complain about my heating system, the community center hosted a holiday party. I went, mostly because Maria had insisted, and found myself actually enjoying it. The building was warm and comfortable thanks to its geothermal system, the same one that had been key to winning my case. I filled a cup from the drinking fountain, the water cool and clean, heated and cooled by the same technology that kept my house comfortable. Somewhere in a state prison, Brenda Thompson was spending her first holiday season behind bars, consequences of her own greed and vindictiveness. Patricia raised a glass for a toast to the community and thanked everyone who'd helped navigate the difficult year. She didn't mention Brenda by name, but everyone knew what she meant. We'd survived a crisis and come out stronger. Later that evening, as I walked back to my house under the clear Arizona sky, I thought about how strange life could be. A simple decision to upgrade my heating system had spiraled into a neighborhood war, a criminal investigation, and ultimately a prison sentence for someone who'd thought they were untouchable. The vapor from my heat pump was visible in the cool night air, a small plume of white mist that dissipated into nothing within seconds. Harmless. Normal. Exactly what the system was designed to produce. I'd protected my right to use efficient, environmentally friendly technology. I'd helped uncover fraud that had been bleeding the community dry. And I'd learned that sometimes standing your ground on principle, even over something as mundane as a heating system, could lead to outcomes you never expected. The following spring brought new changes to Desert Ridge Vista. 3 more families installed geothermal systems, coming to me for advice on contractors and navigating the approval process, which was now smooth and straightforward. Property values in the community actually increased slightly, partly because the HOA's new reputation for transparency and good governance was attracting buyers who'd been scared off by horror stories of other communities with corrupt boards. I ran into Mark Thompson, Brenda's husband, at a grocery store in May. He was thinner, his face haggard. He'd been released from prison after serving 9 months of his sentence and was on probation. We made eye contact across the produce section, and for a moment I thought he might confront me, but he just looked away and hurried off. His role in the fraud had been less central than Brenda's, but he'd still participated, still taken money that wasn't his. The restitution payments were coming in slowly. The Thompsons had sold their house at a loss in the soft market and were renting a small apartment in a less expensive part of town. Their attorneys had worked out a payment plan for the restitution that would take them years to complete. The HOA's insurance had covered most of the loss, but everyone in the community knew that our premiums had gone up because of what Brenda and Mark had done. In June, Robert Chen called to tell me that the Attorney General's office was using my case as a teaching example in their HOA fraud training sessions for law enforcement. "You're famous in a very specific way," he said with a laugh. "Great. I always wanted to be known as the guy who fought the HOA over water vapor." Hey, there are worse legacies. You did a good thing, Jason. A lot of people would have just paid the fines and moved on. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't. The principle mattered. The fact that the technology was sound and approved mattered. And as it turned out, Brenda's vendetta against my heating system had been her undoing. If she hadn't been so determined to make my life miserable, I would never have dug deep enough into HOA procedures and finances to create the opening for Maria to come forward with what she'd discovered. By the time summer arrived in full force, turning Scottsdale into an oven, my geothermal system was proving its worth even more. While my neighbor's electric bills skyrocketed from running air conditioning constantly, mine stayed manageable. The system pulled cool temperature from deep underground, using the Earth's stable temperature to keep my house comfortable without the massive energy consumption of traditional AC. Several people asked me to give a presentation about geothermal systems at the community center. Patricia thought it was a great idea, a way to educate homeowners about sustainable options, and show that the HOA was now truly supportive of such improvements. I agreed, though public speaking wasn't my favorite activity. On a Saturday morning in July, about 30 people showed up to hear me talk about heat pumps, thermal exchange, and the benefits of geothermal heating and cooling. I brought in the contractor who'd installed my system to answer technical questions. During the Q&A session, someone asked about the vapor discharge that had caused all the trouble. I smiled and pointed to the community center's own system, visible through a window. That's what started everything. Brenda complained about the tiny amount of vapor my home system produced, never realizing that she was benefiting from a much larger system right here every time she used this building. The irony is that if she just left it alone, if she hadn't been so determined to find something to complain about, she'd probably still be on the board and her embezzlement might have continued for years. An older man in the back raised his hand. Do you think she targeted you specifically because of some other reason? Or was it really just about the heating system? I honestly think it was just the heating system. She saw something she didn't understand, decided it was a problem, and couldn't back down when she turned out to be wrong. Then it became personal. She started looking for other violations, trying to make my life difficult, and that obsession probably distracted her enough that she got sloppy with the financial fraud. Maria noticed the inconsistencies she might have caught and covered up if she'd been paying attention. The presentation went well, and 2 more families signed contracts with the geothermal installer before the end of the month. My case had effectively transformed Desert Ridge Vista from an HOA that feared innovation into one that embraced it, at least when it came to sustainable home improvements. In August, I got an unexpected letter. It was from Brenda, written from prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was strange, rambling, alternating between self-justification and what might have been attempts at apology. She claimed she'd only been trying to maintain property values, that the money she'd taken had been intended to be paid back, that I'd blown everything out of proportion. But then, in the last paragraph, something that almost sounded genuine. I know you probably won't believe this, but I'm glad it's over. Living with the constant fear of being caught was its own prison. You were right about the heating system. I was wrong. I let my pride turn something small into something that destroyed everything I'd built. I hope the community is doing better without me. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. I didn't respond. What would I say? That I forgave her? I wasn't sure I did. That I hoped she'd learned something. Maybe she had, or maybe this was just another manipulation. Life moved on. Fall came to Arizona, bringing cooler temperatures that were actually pleasant. My heating system continued to perform flawlessly. the vapor discharge now so familiar that I barely noticed it. Neighbors would wave when they walked by, and no one gave the faint mist a second thought. The HOA board, under Patricia's leadership, had become almost boring in the best possible way. Rules were enforced fairly and consistently. Finances were transparent. Meetings were productive rather than confrontational. It was what an HOA should be, a useful organization that maintained common areas and protected property values without becoming a petty tyranny. In October, Maria told me she'd been contacted by the Arizona HOA Association to speak at their annual conference about financial oversight and fraud prevention. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I'm not a public speaker." "You'll be great. Just tell them what happened and what we learned from it." "Will you come with me? I'd feel better having someone there who went through it all." I agreed, and we drove together to Phoenix for the conference. The presentation room was packed with board members, property managers, and HOA attorneys from across the state. Maria talked about the warning signs she'd noticed, the importance of financial transparency, and the need for multiple layers of oversight. I added context about how Brenda's abuse of power in one area had been connected to corruption in another, how small acts of tyranny often indicated larger problems. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people came up afterward to ask questions, share their own stories, or thank us for speaking out. Apparently, HOA corruption was more common than I'd realized, and many communities struggled with how to address it without tearing themselves apart. A woman from Tucson told us that our case had inspired her community to conduct its own financial audit, which uncovered irregularities similar to what Brenda had done. "If you hadn't stood up for yourself over something as simple as a heating system, we might never have thought to look closely at our own board," she said. It was a sobering thought. How many other HOAs were being quietly robbed by board members who relied on apathy and fear to maintain their schemes? How many homeowners were being bullied into compliance with unreasonable rules by people who were themselves breaking far more serious rules? As we drove back to Scottsdale that evening, Maria said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you just removed the heating system when Brenda first complained? All the time. I'd have spent $15,000 for nothing. Brenda would probably still be stealing and the community would be worse off. But I'd have peace and quiet." "Would you do it differently if you could go back?" I thought about it. The stress, the legal fees, the constant worry that had consumed months of my life. Then I thought about the 3 years of continued theft that had been prevented, the families who now had efficient heating systems, the improved governance that benefited everyone. "No," I said finally. "I wouldn't change it. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it's hard, even when it seems like it's not worth it. Because principle matters, truth matters, and standing up to bullies matters whether they're stealing money or just stealing your peace of mind." Winter came around again, marking a full year since my heating system had been installed. The temperature dropped into the 40s at night, and the system produced its characteristic vapor plumes in the early morning. I'd gotten in the habit of making coffee and watching the mist dissipate as the sun came up, a visual reminder of everything that had happened. Brenda would be in prison for another 2 years. Mark was working at a warehouse, his career as a property consultant obviously over. Their son had moved to California, reportedly wanting nothing to do with his parents after the scandal. Their daughter had testified at the sentencing hearing about the shame and embarrassment the situation had caused, asking the judge for leniency. It hadn't worked. I sometimes wondered if Brenda thought about the vapor from my heating system, sitting in her cell. Did she realize how ridiculous her initial complaint had been? Did she understand that her obsessive need to control and punish had been her own downfall? The Desert Ridge Vista community had learned its lessons. New board members were term-limited. Financial reports were detailed and published monthly. Annual audits by external accountants were now mandatory. The architectural review process was transparent and fair, with clear standards that applied equally to everyone. And throughout the neighborhood, more homes had installed geothermal systems, solar panels, and other sustainable technologies. The community had become a minor showcase for green building in Arizona, with a local magazine even doing a feature article about the transformation from an HOA known for restrictive rules to one that led the region in environmental innovation. The article mentioned my case as the turning point, which led to a few awkward conversations with neighbors I barely knew who suddenly wanted to tell me their own HOA horror stories. But mostly, people just appreciated that they could improve their homes without fear of arbitrary enforcement or petty retaliation. In January, 2 years after the whole thing started, I attended an HOA annual meeting. The community center was full, something that never used to happen. People actually cared about the HOA now, wanted to participate, felt like their voices mattered. Patricia gave a state of the community address that was genuinely uplifting. Reserves were healthy. Common areas were well maintained. Several new amenities had been added based on homeowner requests. And for the first time in years, dues weren't increasing. During the open forum portion of the meeting, a newer resident stood up. She'd moved in 6 months ago and was still learning about the community's history. I keep hearing references to something that happened a couple years ago, some kind of scandal. Can someone explain what everyone's talking about? The room got quiet. People looked at Patricia, at me, at each other. Finally, Patricia cleared her throat. 2 years ago, we had a board president who lost sight of what HOAs are supposed to do. She focused on control instead of service, on punishment instead of partnership. One homeowner stood up to that approach, which led to discovering financial corruption that had been happening for years. It was painful for the community, but we came through it stronger. We learned that transparency matters, that fairness matters, and that board members work for the homeowners, not the other way around. The new resident nodded slowly. Is that why there are so many geothermal systems in the neighborhood? I noticed that when we were house hunting. I spoke up. That's where it started, yeah. A complaint about my heating system that turned into something much bigger. Well, the woman said, whatever happened, I'm glad you all worked through it. This is the friendliest, most well-run HOA I've ever been part of. We moved from a community in California where the board acted like they owned everything and we were just paying rent. This is so much better. After the meeting, several people thanked me again for standing firm 2 years ago. I appreciated it, but I was also ready for it to be in the past. I'd done what needed doing. The community had benefited, and now I just wanted to live my life without being the guy who brought down the corrupt HOA president. But I recognized that the story had value, that it illustrated important principles about governance, accountability, and the courage to stand up for what's right even in small matters. So when a local law school asked me to speak to a class about HOA law and resident rights, I agreed. The students were engaged and asked sharp questions. One wanted to know if I'd been afraid of legal retaliation. Constantly, I admitted. HOAs have money for lawyers and I was paying out of pocket, but I had the law on my side, I had documentation, and I had a good attorney. Those 3 things made all the difference. Another student asked if I thought HOAs were inherently problematic or if good governance was possible. They can work, I said. Ours does now, but they require constant vigilance from homeowners. You can't just ignore what the board is doing and hope for the best. Attend meetings. Read the financial reports. Ask questions. The moment people stop paying attention, that's when corruption and abuse can creep in. The professor thanked me for coming and said my case was now part of the curriculum as an example of how individual action could drive systemic change. It was flattering and a little surreal. Spring arrived again, and with it, perfect weather. My heating system worked less during this season, but I knew that when summer came and I needed cooling, it would save me hundreds of dollars in electricity costs. Over 2 years, the system had already paid for itself in energy savings. More importantly, the principle I'd fought for had been firmly established. Homeowners in Desert Ridge Vista could improve their properties with sustainable technology without fear of arbitrary rejection or harassment. That was worth more than any dollar amount. I got a postcard in March from Robert Chen. He'd moved to Denver to join a larger firm, but wrote to tell me he still used my case as an example when talking to potential clients about HOA disputes. Most people are too intimidated to fight, he wrote. They assume the HOA has all the power and they'll lose no matter what. Your case proves that's not true. When you're right, when you document everything, when you stand firm on principle, you can win. Thanks for being willing to see it through. I put the postcard on my refrigerator, next to photos and shopping lists and all the ordinary stuff of daily life. That's what it had all been about, really. The right to live my ordinary life, to make reasonable improvements to my property, without someone else's unreasonable interference. In May, I ran into Patricia at a coffee shop. We chatted about the neighborhood, and she mentioned that the HOA had received an award from the Arizona Association of Community Managers for improved governance practices. They specifically mentioned our financial transparency policies, Patricia said. None of that would have happened without everything that went down 2 years ago. It was terrible at the time, but it forced us to look at how we were operating and make real changes. How's the board working out? Great. We've got good people who actually care about the community. No one's trying to build a personal fiefdom or pad their bank account. It's almost boring, which is exactly what an HOA board should be. We laughed about that, the idea that boring was the goal, but she was right. HOAs should be boring administrative bodies that maintain common property and enforce reasonable rules fairly. They shouldn't be sources of drama, corruption, or neighborhood conflict. As summer heat descended on Arizona again, I sat in my comfortably cooled house, courtesy of the geothermal system that had started everything, and reflected on how much had changed in 2.5 years. A simple home improvement project had exposed corruption, sent 2 people to prison, transformed an HOA's culture, and established precedent that benefited dozens of families. None of that had been my goal when I decided to install a more efficient heating and cooling system. I just wanted to lower my utility bills and reduce my environmental impact. But by refusing to accept unreasonable demands, by standing firm on principle, by insisting that rules be applied fairly and transparently, I'd accidentally become a catalyst for real change. The story had rippled out beyond Desert Ridge Vista, influencing other HOAs across Arizona, and even becoming a teaching example in law schools and professional training. And it had all started because Brenda Thompson couldn't stand seeing a little bit of water vapor in the morning air, never realizing that she herself relied on the same technology every time she visited the community center. The irony still made me smile. Life in Desert Ridge Vista continued peacefully. The HOA functioned smoothly. The community center remained comfortable and welcoming, its geothermal system humming quietly in the background, warming and cooling the building, heating water that was enjoyed by everyone who used the facility. And my own system continued doing what it was designed to do, keeping my home comfortable, saving money and energy, producing that faint morning mist that no one thought twice about anymore. Sometimes I'd see that vapor dissipating into the Arizona sky and remember Brenda's pinched expression, her clipboard, her absolute certainty that she had the power to make me remove a perfectly legal, properly approved, environmentally beneficial system. She'd been wrong about the heating system, wrong about her authority, wrong about everything, and her wrongness had been her undoing. I'd been right to stand my ground, right to fight for principle, right to insist on fairness and transparency, and in the end that made all the difference. The community was better. The HOA was better. And the water that everyone drank at the community center was still being warmed by the same technology that Brenda had tried so hard to ban. Justice, it turned out, could be poetic.